welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by Christoph the XO. Hey, buddy.
Hey, Captain Dale. Good to see you again. Good to be here and talking about history.
Yes, U.S. Navy
Oh,
history.
that's the best kind.
All right, so we're starting a new theater today.
Oh, nice.
We're going down to the South,
That's where the biscuits are
the,
the best.
the Southern Theater of the American Revolutionary War. As always, we will do a broad overview and then zoom in on some of the battles. There are 5 battles that involve a Navy in the Southern Theater,
All right.
and we'll actually talk about some that don't have the U.S. in it because as our allies, and there's still naval battles, and we haven't had a really good naval battle in a while.
I got you.
So that's the plan. You ready to get underway?
Yeah, I'm excited. That's quite a few battles, so let's check it out.
All right. Well, so the Southern Theater. In most colonies, the British officials quickly left as the Patriots took control. In Virginia, though, the royal governor, he did resist. In the gunpowder incident in April 20th, 1775, Lord Dunmore, who was the royal governor of Virginia, he removed gunpowder stored in Williamsburg to a British warship in the James River. Dunmore, he was looking at all the civil unrest that was starting to get more and more and was trying to deprive the Virginia militia, of supplies needed for their insurrection. So the Patriot militia leader, Patrick Henry, forced Dunmore to pay for the gunpowder.
Nice.
Dunmore continued his hunt for caches of military equipment and supplies during the following months. These acts were sometimes anticipated by the Patriot militia, who would move the supplies before Dunmore got there. Dunmore then issues his own Emancipation Proclamation in November of 1775, promising freedom to runaway slaves who fought for the British.
Really? Wow. That's
Mhm.
something I had never heard of. And in Virginia, no less. That's the future capital of the Confederacy.
Yes. So there is a incident at Kemp's Landing in November where Dunmore's troop captured and killed Patriot militiamen. And because of that, Patriot forces defeated Loyalist troops, which included runaway slaves that Dunmore had formed into his Ethiopian regiment.
Is that one of those situations where he can only think of one African country? And he's like, I don't know, we'll just call them the Ethiopian Regiment? Or were they actually from Ethiopia, which is East Africa, and I wouldn't imagine they would be.
No, it's definitely racism.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that is the most logical conclusion.
Yes. But this was at the Battle of Great Bridge on December 9th.
Okay.
Dunmore then had to retreat to the Royal Navy ships anchored off Norfolk. And these naval forces then proceeded to bombard and burn the town.
Wow.
Arson.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hey, all right. Join us, listeners.
This was on January 1st of 1776. Dunmore was driven from an island in the Chesapeake Bay that summer, and, well, he never came back.
Is it like he's in a better place, never came back, or just he's abroad and good riddance?
Well, nowadays, he's in a better place, never came
Right.
back.
Yeah.
But then it was just he never stepped
Oh,
foot
okay.
back in Virginia again.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that it was both.
It is both, just with a time gap.
That's right. First one and the other. Okay. I'm on board.
Good. Georgia's royal governor, a guy named James Wright, he remained in power until January of 1776, when a unexpected arrival of British ships near Savannah prompted the locals to order his arrest.
Hmm.
Georgia patriots and loyalists both believed that the fleet had arrived to provide military support to the governor, but it had in fact been sent from the British forces that were besieged in Boston to acquire rice and other provisions. Wright was able to escape his captivity and reach the fleet. In the Battle of the Rice Boats, which is one of the battles we will be covering,
Mm-hmm.
in early March, the British successfully removed from Savannah a number of merchant vessels containing the supplies that they wanted.
Wow.
So, South Carolina, their population was politically divided when the war started. Now, the lowland communities that was dominated by Charleston were strongly patriot in their views, while the backcountry had a large number of loyalist sympathizers. By August of 75, both sides were recruiting militias. And in September, the Patriot militia seized Fort Johnson, which was Charleston's major defense works.
Mm.
And Governor William Campbell fled to the Royal Navy ships in the harbor. He was like, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. Run, run.
I think that's quoted, right? That's it. That's what he said precisely.
Sure.
Well, we're just trying to inform the public at large about U.S. Navy history, and here we are.
So the seizure of the Loyalists of a shipment of gunpowder and ammunition that was intended for the Cherokee caused a escalation in tension that led to the first siege of 96 in late November. Patriot recruiting was then outstripping that of the Loyalists, and a major campaign, which was called the Snow Campaign, because of a unusually heavy snowfall.
Well, yeah, I guess January time frame, right? That's
This involved as many as 5,000 patriots.
wow.
This was led by a guy named Colonel Richard Richardson.
That's lazy naming on this colonel's parents. Richardson. Come on.
Well, I'll let you go ahead and just tell them.
I'm
that
going to
they're
write a
lazy.
strongly worded letter to his descendants saying this was lazy.
But his descendants had nothing to do with it.
Well, I cannot write. Okay, so scratch that. First step, time machine. Second step, meeting the Richardson parents and possibly interrupting the timeline that you're about to convey to everybody. I may have already messed it up.
Or you could just Ouija board it.
It's true. That is a lot less R&D investment. That technology already exists.
Yes. So he succeeds in capturing and or driving away most of the Loyalist leadership. So that means that the Loyalists flee. They go to either East Florida or to the Cherokee lands. Now, a small faction that went to the Cherokee lands, these were called the Chickamauga. They rose up in support of the British and the Loyalists in 1776 and were put down by militia forces from North and South Carolina. Now, as you can imagine, that it is very crucial in any British attempt to gain control of the South was having a port so they can bring in supplies and lobsterbacks.
Right, of course.
So the British organized an expedition to establish a strong post somewhere in the southern colonies and sent military leaders to recruit loyalists in North Carolina. Now, the expedition's departure from Europe was delayed by quite a bit, and the loyalist force that was recruited to meet it was defeated very badly
Oh,
in the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge in late February of 76. So when General Henry Clinton arrived at Cape Fear in North Carolina in May, he found conditions there that were unsuitable for their purposes. So the Royal Navy sent scouts out and identified Charleston, who their defenses were unfinished and seemed to be vulnerable. And they were like, hey, this could work. So in June of 76, Clinton and Admiral Sir Peter Parker led a assault on Fort Sullivan. This was the fort that guarded Charleston Harbor. Clinton, though, had failed to order a complete reconnaissance of the area. So he landed 2,200 men on Long Island, which is an island next to Sullivan's Island,
okay.
on where the fort was positioned. And they found that the channel dividing the two islands was way too deep to ford.
Oh,
So, but instead of, getting back onto his boats, he relied on the naval's forces that he had to reduce the fort. Now, the firepower on the British ships was unable to make an impression on the logs that they used. They were very spongy, palmetto logs.
huh. Oh, no kidding. That's the state, is it? Not slogan. You know how
Tree?
New York is the Empire State? Yeah, Creed. It's the Palmetto State.
Oh,
That's what they're known for. I wonder if
hmm.
this is the origin of that.
Well, I mean, because of them using that wood, it was spongy.
Hmm.
So the cannonballs didn't, make them go boom.
Huh.
And the bombardment failed because of this.
How about that? That's cool.
This, as you can imagine, was a humiliating failure. And the campaign for the Carolinas was called off.
Wow. That is significant. They just called it off. Wow. Amazing. Great job, Carolinas.
Yeah. Both Clinton and Parker, they argued after this. They blamed each other for the failure of the assault. Now, it is debated in historical circles that the South was lost because of this failure to take Charleston, because it left the Loyalists unsupported for 3 years
Oh,
and allowed the port of Charleston to serve as an American port
right.
until 1780.
That's huge. And that's a significant port too, so excellent.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they didn't try to blockade it. I mean, there's a lot of coast to cover, and there's only so many British ships, and I understand the limitations there. You have to focus your forces where you need them, but That is a significant port still, and they could still rely on their naval superiority.
Well, naval superiority isn't much, especially when they're using a lot of it to ferry men and supplies
Mm.
from the
Jolly old England.
jolly old England to the Americans.
Yeah.
And they were also having other conflicts in other theaters with other countries at the same time because everybody was starting to rally to the American cause.
Nice. I'm glad we could focus support.
So, one navy against the world, which is, almost what this ended up being.
Yeah. Yeah, we mentioned in previous episodes how both Spain and France get into the mix, and that's right off of their coast, so that's significant.
Yeah. So moving forward, the Patriots in Georgia attempted several times to defeat the British garrison that was based at St. Augustine in British East Florida.
Hmm.
This garrison supported the activities of the Loyalists who fled there from Georgia and other southern states, and were responsible for raiding cattle and other supplies in southern Georgia. So the first attempt was organized by a guy named Charles Lee after he took command of the Continental Army's Southern Department. And he took it from Robert Howe. Remember that guy?
I do. He is infamous in this podcast.
But, he turned it over in 1777. Now, this expedition did fail. Gwinnett and his militia commander, a guy named Lachlan McIntosh, could not agree on anything. So, argument in the highest of the command structure is not going to get anything done. Some Georgia militia companies actually did make it into East Florida, but they were stopped in the Battle of Thomas Creek.
Okay.
The last expedition was more than 2,000 Continental and state militia were raised for this expedition. But this also failed due to arguments between Howe and Georgia Governor John Houston. There was a quick skirmish at Alligator Bridge in late June, and this combined with tropical diseases.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
And the before-mentioned command issues. This left East Florida firmly in British hands for the rest of the war.
I see. When you said St. Augustine, East Florida, I assumed Spanish because it was just a Spanish territory for the longest time, but then I forgot. There was a conflict, I think it was the 7 Years' War, where some land was ceded to the British, and I think this was one of those pieces. And so it was founded in the 1500s, I think, by Spain, and the British just got it right before all this revolutionary stuff, so good timing on their part. And it was a haven, like you said, for the Loyalists, so that's conveniently positioned.
Yeah, but you can't go anywhere once you get into Florida.
It's just like today. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, the only way in and out is by sea if the land route is cut off.
Right.
And it's not a big land route.
Oh, no.
So in 78, the British once again turned their attention to the South, where they hoped to regain control by recruiting thousands of Loyalists.
Wow.
Their assumption of support was based on the account of Loyalist exiles in London who had direct access to the American secretary, a guy named George Germain. So these Loyalists were very eager to regain their lands, and they wanted a pat on the head for their loyalty to the crown. And these guys realized that the best way in which to convince the British to undertake a major operation in the South was to exaggerate the level of potential loyalist support.
Ah.
So, lie.
Yeah. Well, it's just exaggeration. That's on the spectrum of things. Is that so terrible?
It's still a lie.
It is still a lie.
It's a lie that's surrounded by a little bit, a little kernel of truth.
That's the worst. That makes it even more believable. Yeah, sorry for trying to sympathize with the loyalist cause. I am American, and I love America. Just want to put that out there. Continue.
Good to know. Good to know. I think the audience have started putting their picket signs away, calling for your head.
Oh, thank goodness.
So as a group, they had a great influence on the British ministers in London. The British operated under the expectation that they would find substantial support for their actions if, they were able to liberate the right areas. So while in South Carolina, Cornwallis wrote a letter to Clinton, quote, "Our assurances of attachment from our poor distressed friends in North Carolina are as strong as ever." But, this was wrong.
Oh.
And Cornwallis realized this pretty soon after the campaign started.
That's the worst time to realize your folly is when you're in the
Yeah.
middle of a conflict after the decision has been made. It's like, oh, this is bad.
So on December 29th of 78, the British sent a corps of 3,500 men from New York under the command of a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Archibald Campbell. And they went down and captured Savannah, Georgia.
Wow.
He was then joined in mid-January of 79 by the Brigadier General Augustine Prevost, who led troops that marched up from St. Augustine, and they took over outposts on their march. So they're marching up. Oop, that outpost is now mine. Let me keep marching. Oh, that outpost is now mine.
Does it? I'm sorry, I may have missed it. Did you mention what time of year that this happened? Because I imagine marching in the Florida, Georgia region in the summer would have been hell.
Mid-January.
Okay, well that's temperate enough.
Depending on how far north you go, yeah.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Prevost then assumed command of the forces in Georgia, and he told Campbell, "Hey, grab those 1,000 men and go towards Augusta. Now, your goal is to gain control of that town and recruit more loyalists." Now, the guys that survived from the defense of Savannah had retreated to Perrysburg, South Carolina, which is about 12 miles upriver from Savannah.
Okay.
Where they were met by Major General Benjamin Lincoln. He was the commander of the Continental Army forces in the South. He marched most of the army from Charleston in a move that he wanted to use to monitor and oppose Prevost. So in early February, Prevost sent a few hundred men to occupy Beaufort. This was probably intended to divert Lincoln's attention from Campbell's movements. Lincoln, in response to this, sent 300 men with General Moultrie to drive them out. This was the Battle of Beaufort. That pretty much ended in a tie. And, both armies eventually returned back to their home bases. So while this was all happening, Campbell had taken control of Augusta without much resistance. And loyalists were starting to come out of the shadows and saying, "Hey, we're here." And he enrolled more than 1,000 men over 2 weeks.
That's significant. I mean, I guess I just have a smaller scale for what I think the population of America is at this time. But to raise 1,000 men in that amount of time seems substantial.
It's not a small feat.
Yeah.
But even though he was recruiting and he had his own guys, he was not able to prevent the defeat of a large number of loyalists by Patriot militia under a guy named Andrew Pickens. This was the Battle of Kettle Creek on February 14th. And this was only like 50 miles from Augusta. This demonstrated to everyone in the area how much the British Army was able to protect the Loyalists. Campbell then very quickly and suddenly packed up and left Augusta. We think it's because of the arrival of John Ashey with more than 1,000 North Carolina militia. This was to be added to the 1,000 militia that were already across the river from Augusta in South Carolina. So on the way back to Savannah, Campbell turned over command of his men to Augustine Prevost's brother, a guy named Mark. This guy was able to turn the table on Ashe, who was following him south in a battle called the Battle of Briar Creek, which nearly destroyed his force of 1,300 men.
Really? Wow. I'm glad we're going through the Southern Theater just because most of the battles I'm familiar with in the Revolutionary War era are around Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Yorktown, Williamsburg area. So only as far south as, I guess, Southeast Virginia. And so all of this other information, these battles that occurred and are appended and are significant because I'm realizing that troops are being pulled from other geographies to help do this. And then if they're defeated, it's even more significant. This is all playing into, well, the outcome. And I'm riveted, and I'm sure the listener is too. I speak for all of us. So continue, Dale. Just want to give you some encouragement. Keep going.
Encouragement accepted.
All right.
So by April, Lincoln has been reinforced by a large number of South Carolina militia and received additional military supplies through Dutch shipments to Charleston. And he decided to move towards Augusta. He left about 1,000 men under the command of General Moultrie at Perrysburg to just keep a watch on Augustine Prevost. And he began marching north on April 23rd. Now, Prevost, he saw this, and he decided to move 2,500 men from Savannah towards Perrysburg on April 29th. So Moultrie, he fell back towards Charleston rather than, engaging with 2-to-1 odds against. So Prevost pretty much just was able to march with his 2,500 men with no resistance until he was about 10 miles away on May 10th. Then he started seeing, some resistance. 2 days later, he intercepted a message that Lincoln, that was alerted to Prevost's advance and was hurrying back from Augusta to assist in the defense of Charleston. Prevost was like, oh crap, and retreated to the islands southwest of Charleston. but he did leave a entrenched guard at Stono Ferry to cover his retreat. When Lincoln got back to Charleston, he led about 1,200 men, mostly untrained militia, after Prevost. So because, these guys are untrained, this was repulsed by the British on June 20th in the Battle of Stono Ferry. But, this rear guard has succeeded. And once the retreat was done, they abandoned that post a few days later and rejoined their fellows.
Okay.
Now, there was some things that his men did against Charleston, and that was mostly looting and pillaging that his troops did. And of course, you can imagine how ticked off the people in the South Carolina Low Country was.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially
This,
if you're a loyalist, you live there. It's like, hey, we're supporting you guys. And then your side is burning and looting your area. That's oops.
yeah. British have a hard time keeping their loyalist friends loyal because of crap like that.
Right.
Yeah, they did that all the time.
That's how you lose an empire, y'all.
Oh, they learned it the hard way. So in October of 79, there was an attempt by the French and Continental Army to retake Savannah. Under the leadership of General Lincoln and with the assistance of a French naval squadron commanded by a guy whose name I'm going to butcher, Comte d'Estaing.
I think that sounds about right. Okay. So this is an aristocrat, which is, I don't know if that's common in the French Navy at this time, but Count is up there.
Now, this attempt was a spectacular failure.
Oh, no.
The combined French-American forces suffered like 901 casualties.
Oh.
And the British suffered 54 casualties.
Oh, no.
The French Navy found that the fortifications of Savannah possessed similar qualities to those that had defied Admiral Peter Parker at Charleston in 76. Remember that?
Yeah, the Palmetto spongy wood fortifications.
Yep. So, yeah, their artillery bombardment had as about as much effect on the defenses as the English version.
It sounds like that would have been a pretty good export. Like once you figure out, hey, these are great fortification timbers, that would be a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah. But unlike Clinton, who had decided against attacking Fort Moultrie by land, D'Estaing did. In this assault, Count Kazimierz Pulaski, who was the Polish commander of the American cavalry, he was fatally wounded.
Oh.
Yeah. And so Savannah is secured, and Clinton is now able to launch a new assault on Charleston. And this failed in 76. Lincoln then moved his remaining troops to Charleston to assist in the construction of its defenses. So Clinton then moved against Charleston in 1780. This time he blockaded the harbor in March and built up about 10,000 troops in the area.
Yikes.
So because of this preparation, his advance on the city was uncontested. The naval commander, Commodore Admiral Whipple, scuttled 5 of his 8 frigates in the harbor. He did this to attempt to make a barrier for its defenses.
That's an expensive barrier, but I guess effective?
Well, I mean, there's a blockade. You're not getting out anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
You got 10,000 guys coming for you. It's a desperation
Yeah, I
thing.
could see that. When you put the context together, that's clear.
And plus, you scuttle your ships instead of letting them get captured, and the British can't use your ships against you.
That's true. Yeah, more pros than I thought.
So inside of the city, General Lincoln commanded about 2,650 Continentals and about 2,500 militiamen. So they got about 5,100 guys
Okay, that's a.
versus 10,000.
I mean, the odds are against them numerically, but I mean, so far in these last few battles that we've been mentioning, the defense has the advantage.
Right. When you're attacking a defended area, what you want is a 3-to-1
Right.
advantage. This isn't 3-to-1, but it's still,
It's
two to
significant. Yeah,
one.
yeah.
So when British Colonel Banastre Tarleton cut off the city supply lines in his victories at Monk's Corner in April and Lund's Ferry in early May, Charleston was effectively surrounded,
Mm.
and Clinton began constructing siege lines. On March 11th, he commenced the bombardment of the town. So May 12th, 1780 rolls around, and General Lincoln surrenders his 5,100 men.
Whoa.
This was the largest surrender of U.S. troops until the American Civil War.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge.
So, with relatively few casualties, Clinton had seized the South's biggest city and seaport.
Yep. That's
So, this is probably the greatest This is probably the greatest British victory of the war.
oh, absolutely.
And this left the American military structure in the South pretty much in ruins.
Yep.
It wasn't until 1781, after the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, when Nathaniel Greene slipped past Cornwallis, that the British finally lost its advantage in the South.
That's a long time to be dominant in a conflict.
Yeah.
So
So the
oh, sorry. They have Savannah
Well,
and Charleston. So these are port cities in the South. I think you mentioned Norfolk was a subject of conflict as well, and I can't remember if they had that or not. I know the Loyalist governor tried to keep it for a while, but may have lost it. But it seems like the South is fairly secure between St. Augustine, Savannah, and Charleston being in British hands.
yep, until 81.
Yeah.
So the remnants of the Southern Continental Army began to withdraw towards North Carolina and were pursued by Colonel Tarleton. And he defeated them at the Battle of Waxhaws on May 29th. Now, historians are still debating whether this is true or not, but it's said that after the battle that Tarleton had massacred a lot of men after they had surrendered. So because of this, he had a nickname bestowed upon him, Bloody Tarleton or Bloody Ban.
Oh my gosh, that's never the nickname you want. I don't think. Well, I guess depending on your personality, maybe you do.
Yeah. And a rallying cry for the Patriots was also introduced. Tarleton's Quarters, referring to his reputation of lack of mercy.
Ooh, I see. It's like giving no quarter, but you're giving Tarleton's quarters.
Yeah. Now, because of this, there was ramifications. When a loyalist militia surrendered at the end of the Battle of Kings Mountain, A lot of them were killed when Patriot marksmen continued to fire while shouting Tarleton's quarters.
Oh. Yeah, I guess that's bound to happen.
Yeah. So after Charleston, the organized American military activity in the South virtually collapsed.
Yeah.
The states did carry on their governmental functions, and the war was carried on by partisans such as Francis Marion.
Hmm.
General Clinton turned over British operations in the South to Lord Cornwallis, and Continental Congress dispatched General Horatio Gates to the South with a new army. But he promptly suffered one of the worst defeats in U.S. military history at the Battle of Camden.
Huh.
This set the stage for Cornwallis to invade North Carolina. Now, Cornwallis's attempt to raise loyalists in large numbers in North Carolina was crushed when Patriot militia defeated a larger force of loyalists in the Battle of Kings Mountain, October 7th, 1780.
Nice.
Many of these guys had crossed the Appalachian Mountains from the Washington district of North Carolina to fight the British. And so these guys were named the Over Mountain Men.
Nice. That's cool.
So the British plan to raise large loyalist armies did fail because not enough loyalists enlisted. And those that did found themselves at risk once the British army moved on.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about that when earlier in the episode you were talking about the governor having his own Emancipation Proclamation for Virginia, where slaves would be freed if they fought for the Loyalist cause. But then I thought that's a double whammy if Britain doesn't win. Because not only did you fight for the enemy, now that we've won, we're going to punish you even harsher because you don't even have the rights of a citizen. You were a slave.
Yeah. So Gates is replaced by General Nathaniel Greene. And Greene assigned about 1,000 men to General Daniel Morgan. And Daniel Morgan goes and crushes Tarleton's troops at the Battle of Cowpens. This was January 17th, 1781. Greene then proceeded to wear down his opponents in a series of skirmishes and movements referred to as the Race to the Dan. This was named because of the Dan River that flows close to the border between North Carolina and Virginia. And each encounter resulted in a tactical victory for the British, but gave them no strategic advantage.
Hmm.
And while this was happening, attrition took its toll. Now, Cornwallis knew that Greene had divided his forces and wanted to face either Morgan's or Greene's contingent before they could rejoin forces. So he stripped his army of all excess baggage in an effort to keep up with the fast-moving Patriots. So when Greene learned of this, his response was, quote, "Then he is ours." So, yeah, because Cornwallis's lack of provisions played a huge role in later difficulties that he had. So General Greene first fought Cornwallis at Cowan's Ford. He sent William Lee Davidson with 900 men. And unfortunately, Davidson was killed in the river. And when that happened, the Americans retreated.
Oh, yeah. Well, understandable.
Of course, this did weaken Greene's forces a bit, but he did continue his delaying tactics, fighting a dozen more skirmishes in North and South Carolina against Cornwallis's forces. In all, about 2,000 British troops died in these engagements.
That's quite a lot.
Greene summed up his approach in a motto. You might have heard of it. Quote, "We fight, get beat, rise, and fight again."
I like that persistence. That's a good motto to have just in life generally.
Greene eventually felt strong enough to face Cornwallis directly near Guilford, North Carolina. Now, Cornwallis was the tactical victor in this battle. This was the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. But the casualties that he suffered forced him to retreat to Wilmington to resupply and reinforce. So Cornwallis is unable to completely destroy Greene's forces. He did recognize, though, that most of the supplies that they were using were coming from Virginia. This state, up until this point, had been relatively untouched. So against the wishes of Clinton, Cornwallis resolved to invade Virginia,
Hmm.
hoping to cut off the supply lines to the Carolinas.
Makes sense.
The theory was supported by Lord George Germain in a series of letters that left Clinton out of the decision-making process for the Southern Army, despite that he was its overall commander.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, you're in charge, but you do what we say.
Yeah. So without telling Clinton, Cornwallis marches north from Wilmington into Virginia to start his raiding operations. And he eventually meets up with the army commanded by William Phillips and Benedict Arnold.
Oh, yeah.
And they were already doing raiding activities there. So when Cornwallis left Greensboro for Wilmington, he left a big opening for Greene to begin an American reconquest of South Carolina. He achieved this by the end of June.
Wow.
Greene led the siege of 96, which he was forced to abandon when word arrived that Rawdon was bringing troops to relieve the siege.
What do you mean by the Siege of 96? Because it sounds like a year, but clearly it's not because this is in the early 1780s. Is that refer to like a group or a force or a quantity of men, maybe?
It's because it's the 96th district.
Okay, that makes sense.
There you go. So because of the actions of Greene and militia commanders like Francis Marion to drive Rawdon to eventually abandon the 96th district and Camden, effectively reducing the British presence in South Carolina to the port of Charleston. Augusta was also sieged on May 22nd and fell to Patriot forces under Andrew Pickens and Harry Lighthorse Lee on June 6th, which reduced the British presence in that state to the port of Savannah.
Wow.
Greene then gave his guys a 6-week rest on the high hills of the Santee River.
That's a significant rest and probably a key element to their morale and victory.
Yes, a well-rested guy is a lot more effective than a tired guy.
Right.
So on September 8th, with 2,600 guys, he engaged British forces under Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Stewart at Eutaw Springs. This battle was technically a tie, but it weakened the British enough that they withdrew to Charleston, where Greene pretty much sieged them for the remaining months of the war.
Nice.
So that's going to bring us to Yorktown. When Cornwallis arrived in Virginia, he took command of all the British forces in the region. So the forces that were there were led by Benedict Arnold and Major General William Phillips. Phillips, who was actually a very good friend of Cornwallis, unfortunately died 2 days before Cornwallis was able to get to him. at Petersburg. So, one of the drawbacks of not telling your superior officer where you're going, what you're doing, that means that communication is going to be very slow. Sometimes up to 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. That is slow.
So 3 weeks after he began, Clinton finally heard about Cornwallis going up there
Yep.
and in his plans. In March of 81, Washington, responding to the threat of Arnold and Phillips, dispatched the Marquis de Lafayette to defend Virginia.
Yeah.
This guy had 3,200 men at his command. But he was going up against the British, who had 7,200 in the state.
That's a lot.
So Lafayette just started skirmishing with Cornwallis, trying to avoid a decisive battle until he could gather more troops.
Smart.
So it was during this period that Cornwallis received orders from Clinton to choose a position on the Virginia Peninsula and construct a fortified naval post to shelter the ships from the line. Now, Cornwallis did comply with the order. He was like, okay, fine. And put himself in a position to become trapped.
Oh, no.
Because the French fleet's now here
Ah.
under the Comte de Grasse. And now, with General George Washington's combined French-American army, Cornwallis found himself cut off. When the Royal Navy fleet under Admiral Thomas Graves is defeated by the French at the Battle of Chesapeake, a French siege train arrived from Newport, Rhode Island, which made his position untenable.
Ah.
So Cornwallis surrendered to General Washington and the French commander, Rochambeau.
We did it, you guys.
Cornwallis did report this disaster to Clinton in a letter that opened as follows. Quote, I have the mortification to inform your excellency that I have been forced to give up the posts of York and Gloucester and to surrender the troops under my command by capitulation on the 19th instant as prisoners of war to the combined forces of America.
Notice how he excludes the French. I mean, come on, man. This will be
He said combined forces.
of America.
Well, when the French come over, they are under the command of Americans.
Okay, well, you said he was under the command of Comte Rochambeau, so I was like, I don't know if they're independent or... Anyway, this says, as we proceed through the resolution of this conflict, there's a lot... The French get screwed in this deal, and I think this is the precursor to that.
So at the end of all this, with the surrender of Yorktown and the full participation of French forces in battle and the loss of Cornwallis's army,
Oh, yeah.
the British war effort grinds to a halt. The only remaining army for the British of any size worth mentioning was under Sir Henry Clinton in New York. And he is now paralyzed by defeat. So they don't do anything until he's replaced by Guy Carleton in 1782.
Mm-hmm.
So because of this shock and reversal in fortune coming on the back of a naval defeat, this caused a shift in British popular opinion against the war.
Yeah, I bet.
The North Ministry collapsed, and no further major operation on the American continent occurred for the rest of the war.
Wow.
Many historians say that while Saratoga had started the decline of the British fortunes in the Revolution, Yorktown was its death knell.
Absolutely, yes.
All right, so that's going to end our summary of the Southern Theater. Next week, we're going to talk about 5 battles from this theater. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
Okay. So we are going to honor one of our fallen angels with the help of HeroCards.us. And today we're going to honor Commander Richard Leo Savoli. His hometown was East Greenwich, Rhode Island. He served in the U.S. Navy, the Fighter Squadron 73, Quonset Point, Rhode Island. He received the Navy Cross, the Distinguished Flying Cross twice, and the Air Medal 8 times.
8. Wow.
His date of sacrifice was January 18th, 1955 in Jacksonville, Florida. He was 35. So, Richard Leo Dick Savoli was born in East Greenwich, Rhode Island on October 24th, 1919. Staying close to home, he graduated from LaSalle Academy in nearby Providence. They completed a civil engineering degree at Rhode Island State College. With his college graduating class of 1941 facing an uncertain future given world events, World War II.
Oh, yeah.
Savoli worked for a short time as an engineering firm and then joined the United States Navy in October of that year. In the Pacific Theater of World War II, flying an F-6F Hellcat, Navy Lieutenant Richard Savoli served with Fighting Squadron 18 aboard the USS Intrepid CVA-11. During the Battle of Lafayette Gulf, he and his squadron strafed a Japanese battleship, silencing its guns.
Wow.
The following day, Lieutenant Savoli scored a direct hit with a 500-pound bomb, disabling a Japanese carrier. For his actions in the Philippines, Lieutenant Savoli was awarded the Navy Cross. His citation reads, "The President of the United States of America takes pleasure in presenting the Navy Cross to Lieutenant Richard Leo Savoli, United States Naval Reserve, for extraordinary heroism in operations against the enemy while serving as pilot of a carrier-based Navy fighter plane in Fighting Squadron 18, in action against major units of Japanese fleet during the Battle for Lafayette Gulf from 24 to 26 October 1944. Diving with 8 other fighters through intense anti-aircraft fire, Lieutenant Savoli strafed the largest ship of an enemy battleship force in the Siberian Sea, silencing many anti-aircraft weapons and inflicting casualties on enemy personnel. Attacking a Japanese carrier force off northern Luzon the following day, he dived through a terrific barrage of anti-aircraft fire and seriously damaged the carrier with a 500-pound bomb hit. Again, participating in an attack on the enemy's battleship force in the Siberian Sea, Lieutenant Savoli disregarded the terrific anti-aircraft opposition and scored a near miss on a Congo-class battleship with a 500-pound bomb. Then, pulling out, he made a second run to strafe a destroyer, silencing its anti-aircraft weapons and thereby contributing to our successful bombing and torpedo attacks which followed. Lieutenant Savoli's outstanding courage and determination were in keeping with the highest tradition of the United States Naval Service. Lieutenant Dick Savoli was also credited with 4 confirmed aerial victories and 3 probable victories, while with Fighting Squadron 18 during World War II. Savoli remained in the United States Navy and was called back to a combat role with the outbreak of the Korean War. From 1949 to 1951, he served as the executive officer for Fighting Squadron 32 aboard the USS Lafayette, CV-32. The aircraft carrier named after the World War II victory he helped to secure.
That's incredible.
Savoli led his squadron in a F-4U Corsair fighter bomber. During his time on the Lafayette, Savoli's squadron suffered the loss of Ensign Jesse L. Brown, the first black combat aviator in U.S. history. on December 4th, 1950. And we have honored Ensign Jesse L. Brown in past episodes. Savoli flew cover and called in a support helicopter attempting to extract Brown from his downed fighter jet. The loss of Vincent Brown was devastating to the squadron, but they pressed on with their mission. In the winter of 1950, Savoli and his squadron provided close air support against 70,000 enemy Chinese soldiers crossing the Yalu River, enabling 30,000 UN troops to escape encirclement. After the Korean War, Savoli returned to his home state and graduated from the U.S. Naval War College in Newport. He was promoted to the rank of commander and assigned command of Fighting Squadron 73 in 1954. On the night of January 18, 1955, Commander Savoli concluded gunnery training with his squadron and took off from Jacksonville, Florida, in an F-9 Cougar jet bound for Oceana, Virginia. Shortly after takeoff, Savoli's plane crashed into a heavily wooded area, killing the 35-year-old pilot. Richard Savoli left behind his wife, Grace, and his 3 children, Carol, Elizabeth, and Richard Jr., who was just 1 week old. In 2005, Commander Savoli was inducted into the Rhode Island Aviation Hall of Fame. And in 2006, the U.S. Post Office in his hometown of East Greenwich, Rhode Island, was renamed in his honor. So, Commander Richard L. Savoli, we thank you.
Thank you.
So, Christoph,
That's me.
would you kindly take us out?
You got it, Dale. So first of all, thank you so much for listening to this episode. We couldn't do it without y'all. So it's really nice that you're out there listening. And if you want to have your voice heard, let us know what you're thinking about what we're saying or doing or any of that stuff. There's a couple of ways you can do that. You can email us at usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also catch us on X, formerly Twitter. The handle is at I always mess that up, USN History Pod. Or is it US Navy History Pod? It's one of those. You try both. You'll get us. And if you're confused as to which one it is, there's a cheat sheet. You can go to the notes on this episode or any of the episodes and find our contact information, including our Discord server. If you want to join a Discord server, hey, it's here, baby. On top of that, you can find us on YouTube or any place you can find finer podcasts. So please feel free to rate and review. Let us know how you feel. If you're unsure as to how many stars to give us, may I recommend 5? Yeah, I think that would be great. Dale agrees. All right, thank you. I hope you look forward to the next episode like I do. And thank you so much again for being a part of this.
And remember, we now have a new subscription option where you get bonus episodes from us.
Oh.
If you want more of us in your life,
And who
you
does
can support us. You can support us, and you will have more of us in your ear holes.
There's got to be a better
So-
way to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll workshop it. We'll see what happens next episode.
All right, so we're going to wish you guys a fair winds on following sea. Bye, everybody.
Take care.